Well, good afternoon to you, Scott Baker. I'm actually surprised at this topic for a Sunday afternoon that we're talking about.
You mean the topic, and I'll get right to it for Lead Better, self-confidence. Self-confidence is shaped by the people whose validation and respect we seek. So this is about, well, where do we get that validation that's so important to us? This is a shocking topic for you, Mikey Ames?
Yes, it is, because most of the time we're looking for the behavioral nugget, which we do look for a little bit in this particular topic, but it's so psychologically based, right? It feels as if, a psychologist wrote it for us to be able to talk about it today instead of a behavioral researcher, right?
Yeah, right. Let me see if I can. I'll try to set that up and see if it meets your criteria, right? So, as leaders, we're always trying to make people better, situations better. In order for that to happen, those people need to feel good about what they're doing.
Yep.
And we do have many behaviors that a leader can demonstrate that will validate, enforce, underline, build up confidence, sense of vision, enrich people's ability to attend to both complications but challenges with technical detail, right? And so they're getting validation from their leader. Maybe that's important to them, right? So a leader should understand the dynamic. It doesn't just, the way that the leader behaves towards somebody that causes them to be better isn't just like a little switch. It actually it involves their human brain.
Right.
So there's a behavioral application in understanding what this is. Does that make sense? Did I come anywhere close to your criteria here?
Oh yeah. But it's just that most of the time we are getting very quickly to the behavioral part of what we're talking about, and we have a tendency to just assume that everybody knows the psychological bits, and us not really pay attention to it. So we spend a lot more time on this psychology than what is normal for us, to really think about both the, where that kind of affirmation seeking comes from, the types of people who generally do that. And we break it up here. I mean, in talking very quickly about the idea of, it's a normal need for everybody to get validation from people, right? It doesn't necessarily, it fits depending on how you define it into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
But we're on our way to self-actualization eventually inside of Maslow's hierarchy, and that's what we want to encourage everyone to eventually get to, right?
Okay.
But not as psychologists, as leaders instead.
As leaders, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I guess we should say that we're happy for everyone and grateful for those who are watching or listening to this edition of Lead Better. We don't need your approval.
Yeah.
Because this field note is going to go deep into this idea of what are your external anchors and focus, and what is your internal anchors and focus, and it deals with this idea of the range of the reference size that's important to you. And if too many things are important to you, then maybe you're not focusing on the right things.
Yeah.
So now that actually leads to a definitional debate for me here around this external validation point versus the internal validation point that I think actually can be a little controversial maybe in our discussion in relation to this. And so, terrific. But I don't know that, again, we need people that are watching live right now on Sunday afternoon, the 14th, to be saying in the chat to us, hey, you're doing a good job.
Yeah, right.
That's fine.
Right. No, I want people to say in the chat, talk a little bit about this, right? I don't necessarily need affirmations from people who have a comment section right next to them.
Harsh criticism about Mikey is totally fine.
Yeah, no problem at all.
All right.
But what I really want is participation. If you want to engage with more than a heart, actually say what you think or Yeah, or disagreement, right?
Listen,
go for it.
Although I think, we're on for a Sunday afternoon because we're committed. We do this. And again, it's actually Lead Better is a demonstration. of the very principles in this field note, because you and I have done many things on the internet over the last 20 years that have gotten millions, even billions of page views and attentions. And yet we actually did this daily conversation for a couple of years, almost in secret. It was out there. Right. People could watch it. And even now, we don't publicize it too much. So if you've wandered by, great. And so part of it is that the value of the discussion of taking the field note idea, wrestling with it, seeing how, like, let's tug on it a little bit, let's test it a little bit, is just good for you and it's good for me. And if it's good for other people, then dynamite. But the point of doing it wasn't like, okay, I think we want to have a podcast that, like, everybody in the world tunes into so we can feel like we have self-worth. That's not the point.
Right. Now,
it's not the point for me. Might be the point for Mikey.
Not the point for me either. I've dabbled with that. There were times when I, in reference to your, that bygone era of us really dipping into millions of people at a time who were potentially seeing the things that we were posting online. One of those roles for me was making sports jokes about American sports, right? And this is one moment where, when you're joking on the internet and everyone knows that you're joking, because your profile is set up in such a way that it's clear that you are having fun and making jokes. There were people who got in trouble for that, for not making it clear that they were joking, right? So when everyone thought, oh, they were being serious, all of the potential forgiveness for making a bad joke goes out the window. Okay. So when you're making jokes, I won't even say the channel that I was a part of because I'll probably reveal too much about this, but you test where the line is, right? And so I fancied myself the kind of comedian who would test right up to the line. And when someone said, oh, you can't make a joke about that, I'd be like, well, if I make it the right way, like, I can make a joke about it. And so the Oklahoma City Thunder were in the finals back in 2013 or 14. And some of my favorite things to do was to live tweet a sporting event. And while they were in the NBA Finals, I thought one of dozens of jokes that I made that night might reference the Oklahoma City bombing, right? And so,
whoa!
I know, sounds like a dangerous thing to do, but in my mind, provided I just set it up correctly, and that's what I didn't realize.
Really now? Yeah.
On Twitter, the context of, like, bringing, especially when in Oklahoma City, lots of people are online watching and having Twitter side by side. But, this is a medium where I'm making hundreds of jokes
all the time.
Just all the time. And so some
of
them were
millions of views.
Yeah, and some of them were just tests for me as to be like, and not necessarily what I could get away with, but, where is the line? And so when you fancy yourself a comedian online, you kind of test it. Sometimes you put your Andy Kaufman hat on to be like, how irritated can I make the audience, right? How much, and so it's not necessarily how much can I get away with. You're just wondering where the line is constantly, and so that's in my mind. We even reference this in the field note. That's what social media is for. Like, it's a large audience of things to test people on. The joke didn't go well. It didn't go well at all.
Yeah, I could have told you should have called me. I could have told you that.
I was so, well, I'm in the middle. It's the NBA Finals, and so you're in the middle of it. So
rapid fire decisions.
I did not realize how it would affect me. I felt like for about a 4-hour period, my whole world is falling apart because there was this instant mob mentality. There was this instant campaign to, like, boycott the Twitter channel, right? I did actually. So I started immediately trying to, like, tune in to how many followers on Twitter we're losing, right? And it was just this giant cascade because of a misworded joke that probably shouldn't have been going out in the first place. But then it was just like my whole self-worth was now tied to this. Yeah. The notion of
the external
anxiety.
Focus. You're defining the whole front end of the field note.
Completely. By strangers on the internet who thought that I was a certain kind of person simply because I was dabbling with a certain kind of joke that didn't go over well. And boy, just
learned it.
Oh, I learned it. And it's like ever since, I mean, it's like in my mind, like where to make a joke and what the line is. I'm probably not as good of a comedian because I'm, in terms of like not willing to take risks
be
that
safe.
I did.
Yeah.
Right. Because I didn't have a real audience that really cared about me. And I frankly, I didn't really care about my audience either. Right. I cared when they tuned out, but I didn't have like this nucleus of people. So to
It
the
was a
point
transactional orientation. Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, right. So it's a couple of minutes left here. So that's on the external. You see the dangers. So if you go to saying, as the field note saying, people that have an internal anchor, meaning there's a stable sense of self, and they're looking for real feedback from trusted friends and colleagues, or from those who have the expertise to calibrate their value, right? So you're saying, all right, I kind of know who I am. I know what I'm doing. I know where I need to get better. Let me stay in those conversations. And then therefore they consider the validation from the external sources as kind of irrelevant or inconsequential, might even be unseemly to, when they see people pandering for that. And so in that category, the question is that the kinds of people that then are externally focused as opposed to internally focused have a different degree of ability to withstand criticism. They're different in the way they're defensive about behaviors. There's all kinds of things. So the field note gets a little behavioral, saying, if you notice a team or a family member's self-confidence swinging wildly, maybe lean in a little bit, encourage them to focus on the opinions of those who know them well, right? And so that is a bit of a leadership thing, in this. Now, I do think that you and I particularly would be suited, and we only have a minute or two here, to talk about the nature of validation versus conversation and mission. Because I would also say, if I'm trying to get better, then whether I have an internal sense of self and I'm trying to get better at doing something, and if I'm doing something good in the world, it is probably something that makes other people and situations better. Yes. I'm in a conversation, a relationship. And so we could see that as a small locus, but it can also be a big locus. Like nobody would say, I think Martin Luther King Jr. would have been so much more effective if he just didn't speak to big crowds. Right? No, he's speaking to big crowds, right? And so, and some, not always, right? But we remember him in that context because the goal wasn't for him to get up in front of, a mass audience of tens or hundreds of thousands of people and be like, "You're so great." No, the goal was to get into a conversation with those people. We sometimes think of these conversations as one-to-one, and there are moments in social media, like the when you were in that what you described, where it's a transactional thing. You're actually hidden behind the identity of the site, and you're making a joke. People, if they were following, liked or didn't like particular jokes. And that's all you're getting out of it. But you can have a desire. Not everybody that is seeking a public discussion is doing it because they need external validation. Some people, it's the same thing that they're doing. I'm trying to make people better, situations better, but I'm doing it at a mass scale.
Right.
And some of the most effective communicators in the world have been those who have been at a mass scale communicating issues and ideas of great importance. So to me, it's not just a matter of saying internal, external relative to small versus large. I think a lot has to go to the motive of what you're trying to do when you're having a one-on-one conversation or when you're having a one-on-a-million conversation.
Right. And that actually shows up in the way you have one-on-one conversations too, right? Because if you care about making people better, then you won't have the tendency to just wait till people are done talking so that you can say your thing, right? That those are the things that you could like eject from your head. Like you might have 50 things that run through your head that you could potentially say. But if you're actually listening to me, you're more intrigued by the conversation getting better. And by your ability to learn something is more important than you being able to pretend like you said the most brilliant thing in the conversation.
And usually, if you're listening carefully, it's actually how you are helping that other person become better. Because we actually do think out loud. All of us do, to one extent or another. And so as I'm listening to what somebody is saying, and if I ask a question, if I say, well, what did you mean by that? I might never actually have to advocate for any particular direction or point.
Right.
And that may actually, just being the good listener may be the thing that actually helps you clarify your thinking. And then we're good, right?
Right. So Sackling Singh is a commenter who showed up over on Substack as we've been talking. He asked a specific question. It happens to not be anything to do with our field note today, but we're at 15 and a half minutes. So I thought, kind of prove what you just said about, redirecting conversation, making it better, listening. Maybe we address this question. By the way, this also brings up the point that we'll do Q&As. Yeah, we'll do Q&As at some point, right? Where we'll actually maybe spend an hour. But he says, what's more important for team success? Competing or collaborating with each other, or a balanced mix of both on your team?
Team to team competing, or within the team? Like if you're a leader of a team, do you have people inside the team competing for positions, titles, reward?
With the way that he's talking about inside of a specific team, it seems like, with the way that he's worded it. What's more important for a team's success?
Yeah.
So a single team.
I think you could imagine destructive and positive scenarios for both, right?
Right.
If you're on a sales team and it's very Glengarry Glen Ross, where it's kind of like go, 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 close, close, close. This guy is great. You all suck and you're out the door, right? And in fact, we're gonna lacerate you so much that your entire self-image is actually destroyed in the process of this. That's different than a collegial, let's make each other better and see where we produce. And so if you can imagine, if you have a good-natured competition, that can you do that around the roles of the work in the same way that you might have a friendly competition around, basketball brackets in the springtime, right? Where there's a little competition inside the organization or something like that. I do think that you kind of go back to saying that what is the idea of competition and co-conspiring to make each other better. Right. And you can see, like, even I was watching UFC fights yesterday, the way that people will brutally beat each other for 15 minutes and then hug like crazy. And why do they do that? Because they say, you brought your best and I brought my best and you made me better. If you didn't bring your best, I wouldn't have gotten better.
Right.
So you didn't work for a different company, but we were here in this moment of competition. But I think that's different than the one that I mentioned the other day, where I knew a media organization where the head of that organization would sometimes put 2 or 3 people in charge of the same thing just to see how they would fight and viciously destroy each other.
Right.
And that the strongest person would emerge. And I knew one of the people that was one of those 3. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really admire that person too much. And so I think they got chewed up in the middle of all of that process and probably deserved it, right? But you can see where, the direction here, which is, I think that really depends on that. I think if you say, look, we're going to have, we might do this in our organization. We have some big goals for 2026. And we might say, look, we have a baseline of things that we want everybody in the firm to do, but we're going to actually point and honor the people that do really well at that thing. And there's an implied benchmark. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But collaboration, I think you can have both competition and collaboration.
I think it's an offensive thing for some people to hear that it depends on your company's values, because everyone assumes that, well, you should have my values because my values are the best. But some company, some organizational values and the way that they are enacted in a company's culture mean that it's going to be a highly competitive place. And so a high-performing team in that kind of culture might be very competitive with each other. Now, there's might be a lot of other organization that look at that organization and says, well, look at how much turnover and churn you have in your employee. Then there's no possible way that can be quote unquote good, right? Mm-hmm. But that means that your organization has different values than this organization. So it is highly dependent. You'd probably have like a moral judgment to make on one organization or another. But, and some people would really argue with it. Some people would have a really hard problem with that positioning because they really do believe that their values are the kinds of values that everybody should have and not vary for them.
Yeah.
So,
But let's say, but could you, in applying any kind of value, right? And oftentimes we do talk about admired leadership behaviors and our insights that are in the field notes as being agnostic to values, meaning you can apply these insights, advice, and behaviors in a very different set of contexts depending on your values.
Right.
But you might say, in relation to this question, let's say the competition, we see competition as a good. Like I'm going to watch your numbers, you're going to watch my numbers, we're going to be checking in. But if we collaborate around the parameters of how that's measured, how it's conducted, and then we say, all right, everybody ready for Q1? Yep. And then off we go. And now we're off into, and if the goal is to encourage, then I think it can be a net positive.
right. Okay. Well, Sackling, thank you for asking the question.
Indeed.
We said at the beginning that we wanted your engagement, and you did it. And so there we go. We'll, at some point, do something that is just Q&A based, and it probably won't just be Scott and I answering the questions. We've got actual practitioners who do this kind of thing all the time.
Yeah, indeed.
And so we'll bring them on for that kind of thing. So, but for this Sunday afternoon, thank you, Scott. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mikey.
All right. Bye now.